On June 10th of this year, we were treated to another Steven Spielberg alien movie named Disclosure Day. Now, spoiler warning straight away, I'm going to talk about many elements of not just this movie, but also other Steven Spielberg alien movies. So if you also haven't seen E.T., War of the Worlds, or Close Encounters, then maybe skip this video for now and come back to it afterwards. I do recommend watching them. And especially Disclosure Day, I'm going to talk about in full detail from beginning to end and my thoughts about it and public reception. So if you haven't seen the movie yet, I truly also think this is one of those movies that is best viewed with knowing as little as possible going into it. I went to watch Disclosure Day literally on the day it came out, I'm pretty sure. And ever since, I've been thinking a lot about the movie and why I think it worked so well for me, whereas it didn't work for some other people. I understand why some people initially thought the pacing maybe was a little bit strange, or they wanted the movie to be more direct, or maybe they expected a bigger spectacle from the aliens, or wanted the movie to be more explosive once the truth finally came out. But for me, all of those reasons were actually why I like the movie so much. Because to me, Disclosure Day is not just a movie about aliens existing. It's a movie about what happens when people are forced to understand that the world is bigger, stranger, more fragile, and probably more connected than they initially thought it was. And even more, what I really enjoyed about it is that Spielberg doesn't just treat it as a government conspiracy or an action set piece or as a cool science fiction twist. He treats it as a very personal story, something that Spielberg does very well. And honestly, that's where I think this movie sits so interestingly alongside Spielberg's other alien movies like E.T. And for me, E.T. will always be at the top of those. I rewatched E.T. recently, kind of as a prep for Disclosure Day, but also just because it was one of my favorite movies growing up, and it really re-solidified why that was the case. It's not just because E.T. is cute or the bike scene is so iconic or the emotional ending really ruins me, it's because the whole story is about a very personal encounter with the unknown. It's a child meeting something that should be impossible and responding with curiosity rather than fear. It's a family being pulled through grief and loneliness. It's childhood being protected for as long as it can be until the adults or the authorities and the systems around them arrive, and suddenly the sense of wonder becomes something that has to be controlled. And I think that Disclosure Day is doing a version of that, but for adults. It's asking the question, what happens when the childlike wonder of E.T. grows up, goes through the world, loses some of its innocence, becomes surrounded by institutions and media and conspiracy theories and corporate secrecy, and then still has to decide whether empathy is possible. So very quickly, just a brief recap of Disclosure Day and what we're even talking about here. It's Steven Spielberg's new alien sci-fi movie, and it follows two main characters who are pulled into the center of a world-changing revelation. Aliens are real. Emily Blunt plays Margaret Fairchild, a Kansas City meteorologist and a former journalist who starts experiencing things that she can't fully explain and slowly becomes central to the release of information about extraterrestrial life. Then we have Josh O'Connor, who plays Dr. Daniel Kellner, a cybersecurity specialist, love that for me because that's what I do, and a whistleblower who has access to the evidence that proves that aliens exist and have had contact with the Earth. Colin Firth plays Noah Scanlon, the head of Wardex, which is the powerful organization trying to control the truth and suppress the evidence and shape what the world is or isn't allowed to know. So the basic premise is quite simple, but in that regard, perfect for Spielberg. What if we found out we're not alone? And what if the biggest part of that story was not the alien life itself, but how humanity reacts once the truth can no longer be contained? And how do we as humans decide what should or shouldn't be contained? Who has the final say over that? So the film begins with this sense of secrecy and pursuit. Daniel's trying to get the evidence out. Margaret is trying to understand why she has become connected to this impossible thing. There are flash drives, hidden footage, government and corporate pressure, chase sequences, newsroom tension, and then eventually the first tape gets released. And that's where I think some people actually somehow wanted the movie to either speed up or end, and they wanted the moment of disclosure to be, I guess, the final climax of the movie, which kind of baffles me, to be honest. But Spielberg doesn't stop there, and I'm so glad he doesn't, because the whole point of calling the movie Disclosure Day is not just that disclosure happens, it's that the day continues afterwards. The world doesn't just freeze and stop moving the second the truth comes out. People react, institutions panic, religion has to respond, newsrooms become battlegrounds, and ordinary people suddenly have to process something that should be abstract and now has become incredibly real. And so by the time we get towards the ending and we see the alien and we realize how deeply Margaret and Daniel's connection goes, the film becomes less about are aliens real and more about whether humanity is still capable of listening. That is a much more interesting question to me than Are aliens real? Do they exist? And what would they look like? Now, the public reception to this movie has definitely been quite mixed, and it's been quite split, and not necessarily in the dramatic like you either love it or you hate it, but in a sense that people seem to be responding to the same things, just very differently. Some people have praised it as a classic Spielberg, emotional, personal, sincere, old-fashioned in a way that for the current day and age of movies actually feels refreshing and is carried by a really strong performance by Emily Blunt. Other people have found it too slow, too sentimental, too messy, or too unwilling to fully explain itself and dive into everything. And I do get that, I do. Because if you go into this wanting a clean, sharp, modern sci-fi thriller where every reveal clicks neatly into place, and there's nothing wrong with that, and aliens are there to deliver either terror or spectacle, I can see why this movie might feel a little bit frustrating to you. It's not that kind of film. It wanders and it lingers throughout the story and gives you time with the characters, maybe for some people too much time. But because of that, it allows these moments of uncertainty and not knowing what to do to just sit. And that's why this movie felt really alive to me and really fun. I like that the movie wasn't engineered to be perfectly efficient, that there were human pauses, that the main character can get into a car during a terrifying situation and suddenly drive not like he's in a superhero movie, but like he has no fucking clue what's going on. He crashes into things, he's messy, he's panicked, and the escape is not elegant. The explosions are not huge and blockbuster-like. They're just, yeah, a car is exploding in the background. And that sounds like a small thing, but I personally really appreciate that, because in a lot of modern blockbusters, ordinary people suddenly become competent the second the plot requires them to do though. So they suddenly know how to fight, drive, run, shoot, hack, survive, and deliver perfect one-liners under pressure. Here, however, when Daniel is in danger, it feels like someone who's actually in danger. He's not entirely sure what he needs to do. That to me is where the pacing and realism of the film work really nicely together. The film is not trying to constantly escalate everything into a bigger explosion and a bigger possible version of itself. Even when it gives us bigger action, like the train sequence, which I thought was really good, it still feels grounded in that the characters are trying to survive something rather than the movie is trying to prove to us how expensive it is and how explosive everything has to be. Before I get deeper into Disclosure Day even more, I think it's worth looking at Spielberg's relationship with alien movies, because this is obviously not the first time he's explored the territory. It all started in, I think, is it 1977, when Close Encounters of the Third Kind came out, which I have to be really honest about. I saw it like once as a kid. I haven't seen it again. I'm aware of its place in like cinema and how important it is, but I don't want to sit here and pretend like I have wisdom to impart to you about the movie. But I obviously wanted to bring it up, and I know for a lot of people it's like a classic alien movie. Then there's E.T., which hence for me, and this is a personal decision, is the top spot in his alien movie franchises. Then there's War of the Worlds, which for me is right at the bottom. I did not enjoy War of the Worlds at all. Maybe a bit of a controversial opinion, but growing up with the original like audio recording of War of the Worlds, which absolutely terrified me, the movie didn't terrify me at all. And so it was this really weird disconnect. I guess in a way it was a way for me to experience the story of War of the Worlds without having nightmares, but I don't think that the movie is as fantastic as the source material. And so the reason that E.T. works so well for me is because the alien encounter is so intimate before it's anything else. We're not starting with governments or military briefings or mass panic. We're starting with children, a house, a family, and this strange little being that becomes part of their wider emotional world. It's playful at first and funny and tender, and then as adults get close and the outside world starts pressing in, that private connection becomes something really fragile that one has to be defended, but two is also not understood by everyone, which creates more conflict. And that's what makes that movie so beautiful and sad to me. I cry every time. It's about the death of childhood in a way, because the children understand E.T. before the adults do. They relate to him through care and playing and secrecy and imagination, and the adults relate to him through investigation and containment and fear. And even though the adults aren't all evil, the minute the encounter becomes institutional, something does get lost for them. And I see a very similar idea being translated in Disclosure Day for the adults. Margaret and Daniel aren't children hiding an alien in a wardrobe. They're adults surrounded by media systems, corporate power, surveillance, information warfare, and a lot of public distrust. But the emotional question is actually very similar. Can you encounter something completely unknown and still respond with empathy before you respond with control? That's where Colin Firth's character becomes so interesting, because Noah is not just an obstacle in the plot. He represents a very specific way of thinking. He represents the belief that the truth has to be owned and managed and released only when specific power decides it's safe to do so. He's the adult world in the most polished, strategic, and dangerous form. And I think that's where Spielberg's alien films become so fascinating, because the aliens are almost never just aliens. They are mirrors. In E.T., the alien reveals the emotional state of family. In War of the Worlds, the aliens reveal human vulnerability and panic. In Close Encounters, from roughly what I remember, the encounter is tied to obsession, awe, and almost like religious transcendence. And then in Disclosure Day, the aliens reveal humanity's crisis of trust. They reveal that the problem is not only that we didn't know the truth, the problem is that we might not know how the world will receive the truth and how it will completely change our social landscape. One of the strongest parts of Disclosure Day, I think, for me specifically, is how personal it feels, especially through the characters of Margaret and Daniel. I really enjoy that we initially follow them separately before they then come together, because it means that their connection doesn't feel like simple plot convenience, and also their characters aren't only defined by their connection, but they're two individuals as well that have their own things happening at the same time that they also need to figure out. Daniel's storyline has that whistleblower urgency, which I actually really liked because it makes the movie feel quite modern without turning it into like a cold political thriller, but it's a type of storyline that we're seeing more of in modern day. He's a cybersecurity expert, he understands the systems, the secrecy, the evidence, the exposure, but he's also completely human in the way that he moves through danger. And I think Josh O'Connor gives him this kind of nervous, fragile determination that I found really compelling, because he doesn't play him like someone who magically just becomes a hero and also magically knows exactly the right thing to do. He plays him as someone who is scared of the truth that he holds, but has crossed the line internally where he can't go back. And then Margaret definitely is the emotional center of the movie. Emily Blunt is so good in this movie. She's yet to let me down. She could easily have played Margaret as maybe overwhelmed or frantic or noble or haunted, but there's so much more going on in her performance. You can feel her desperately trying to understand what is happening to her in real time. She's scared by it, but she's also drawn towards it, which I think is such a human emotion. She's skeptical, but she's not closed off. She's professional, but increasingly unable to keep this impossible thing at a distance. And she has this drive to figure out what her purpose in life is. And I love that. And I think that's what makes her such a strong Steven Spielberg specific protagonist, because he is really good at writing characters who aren't just kind of reacting to spectacle, but they're changed by the spectacle around them. They're character studies, and he can put people inside these massive cinematic ideas, whether it's a shark or dinosaurs or aliens or historical crisis, and still make the emotional experience feel very specific. In Disclosure Day, Margaret's journey is not just a woman discovers that aliens exist. It's more like woman becomes emotionally and spiritually responsible for helping the entire world hear something that it might not be ready to hear. That is so much more interesting to me. And when they do finally come together, I like that the film doesn't just turn it into either maybe even a romance or a typical action partnership. Their bond is a lot stranger than that. It's shared trauma, childhood connection, almost this impossible sense that they've been chosen or prepared or shaped to do something that's far beyond them. And that could have felt ridiculous, but for me it worked really well, because the film has already spent time letting us get to know them as individuals and as people before they became symbols for the wider world. Then of course we have to talk about the religious aspect of Disclosure Day. It's one of the things I found really interesting, and I'm actually really happy that the film goes there, because I think for the message of the movie, which is how does the world respond to something like this, it's impossible to not bring religion into it. I recently had a really interesting discussion with someone at work where we talked about religion, and we talked about, do we think it would change us fundamentally as people if we found out that God was real? If the world found out that alien life, and not just microbial life, but actual intelligent life that had interacted with humanity, was not just a scientific event, but real, it would also turn into a religious event, 100%. It also would turn into a philosophical event, a psychological event. It would force people to ask what humanity is, what faith means, what creation means, whether we are central to anything at all, and whether being less central makes us less meaningful or actually connects us more together. And so that's why the storyline with the nuns, I think, for me, worked really well. I know some people might find it a bit heavy-handed, but I like that the film allowed religious characters to be part of the conversation rather than treating faith as something that would simply just collapse if something like this came out. That would be a very easy version. It'd be very easy to say, okay, once we found out we weren't the only people, religion doesn't have a leg to stand on. I don't think that's an interesting story to tell at all. The more interesting version is asking how faith adapts and how it listens and how it reinterprets mystery, because mystery is already part of faith. And I also think, again, that's why Disclosure Day connects to a lot of Spielberg's other alien movies. His alien films have always had this kind of spiritual quality to them, I think, even when they're not explicitly religious. Close Encounters has that sense of pilgrimage and revelation. E.T. has the imagery of death and resurrection and healing and farewell. And Disclosure Day brings that into a more direct conversation with religion, but still keeps the core question very human, which is not, are we alone? But it's also, would knowing that we're not alone make us more humble? And I think that's also why the ending of this movie lands very well for me. The alien's last message, or at least the way that the film leaves us with it, is not some ginormous explanation of where they came from and what their tech is or what they're here to do. It's not a lore dump. It's not the beginning of a franchise bubble. It's very simply, listen. And I know that might frustrate people, but I love that type of shit, because that is such a simple word, but in the context of the film, it becomes almost enormous. Listen to each other. Listen to the truth. Listen to what frightens you before you try to destroy it. Listen to the thing you don't understand. Listen before you try to control. Listen before you decide that you already know something that you don't. That feels very Spielberg to me. And it also feels very relevant right now, because we live in a world where disclosure of any kind doesn't automatically lead to a shared reality, now does it? And you can show people evidence and they will still argue about whether it's real or not, and who released it, and who would benefit from the release of it, and is it propaganda, is it a conspiracy theory, is it a distraction, and whether it fits the belief that people already hold. So the film is not naive about truth at all. It knows that truth doesn't magically fix everything, but it still believes that truth matters and that people should have their own versions, I guess, in a way of that. And I really like that. And just to bring it back to the pacing side of things, I think what I really enjoyed is that the movie lets the disclosure and the event of the disclosure breathe. For me, it's almost like, you know, in a romance movie, when at the end the couple gets together and you're like, but I want to see them together. I want to see what life they build. I want to see them actually be happy for a while now. And the movie's already ended. Like, that's so frustrating. For me, if the movie had ended at the moment that the first tape gets played, I would have found that incredibly frustrating. I like that we get to see people respond in real time. We see quite a long montage of news outlets responding to what is going on. I thoroughly enjoyed that. I'm so glad we have a movie that finally doesn't end at the point where you kind of get to the peak of the storyline. And I think it also opens up the opportunity for more questions, which are not just, can they prove that aliens exist? Okay, well, they, I guess in a way, have done that. The question is, what are we as a society now that we know? And how do we deal with disclosure like that? And that's such an interesting question to me. And so we get to the ending of the movie, which I think some people have enjoyed. I think some people definitely didn't enjoy it, but I, as you can tell, I did. By the time we see the alien and Margaret is placed in this position of relaying something to the world, the film has already told us what it's about. It's not really about alien biology or the mechanics of their tech, and it's not really about whether humanity is about to enter a new political era, although that's part of it. But at the core, it's about empathy. And I think that's also why the alien reveal at the end worked really well for me. It was supernatural and sci-fi and emotional all at once. It didn't feel like the movie suddenly became a new genre. And I also like that the alien itself wasn't treated as a monster nor as a savior. It was just something else, something new, something we can't fully comprehend or read, and something that made the humans around it reveal themselves. And I think that's the alien mode, if you will, that I tend to respond to the most. The alien that doesn't just arrive to destroy us or to rescue us. The alien arrives and then we discover who we are by how we respond to something like that. And again, that's something that E.T. does so beautifully. And that is what Disclosure Day, I think, is trying to do much more in an adult and anxious modern type of way. And so when Margaret tells the world to listen and the film ends with this unresolved feeling, I didn't feel cheated by it at all. I felt like it gave the question back to us, because what else could the movie really say? If the film ended with a long explanation of the aliens' plan, I actually think it would have made the movie a lot smaller. By ending where it does, it keeps the focus on humanity. It keeps mystery alive, which is always fun, and it leaves us in that kind of uncomfortable place where we've been given the truth, but we don't have control over it anymore. And so I don't think that Disclosure Day will ever take the top spot in Steven Spielberg alien movies from E.T. That's always gonna be, that's my baby. But it's up there. I like it. I definitely prefer it over War of the Worlds, and I guess I'd have to do a rewatch of Close Encounters of the Third Kind to be able to place that in there somewhere. The performances were fantastic. I liked the pacing of it, and most of all, I felt like the film was really sincere in its message. And I think sincerity is sometimes very undervalued now, especially in these big genre blockbuster movies like sci-fi. We're so used to films protecting themselves with irony, speed, spectacle, and franchise logic that when the movie earnestly asks us to think about empathy, faith, and trust, and whether humanity can still listen, it can almost feel kind of strange because it feels like they're grasping for something deeper in a movie that's filled with just spectacle. But I found in this movie it worked really well, and I found it moving. And I don't think that Disclosure Day is perfect, and I understand why it won't work for everyone. But for me, I think it's a great new Alien movie because it remembers that the most interesting thing about aliens is not always the alien itself. Sometimes it's about what it reflects back to us about our behavior, how we react, how we fear, how we hide, how we love, how we make sense of the world, and how our kind of social, political, psychological climate, how all of it interacts together. And so that's what I'm still thinking about now, like a month later after the movie came out. Have you watched the movie? What do you think? Do you think I'm crazy? Do you think it was the worst movie you've ever seen? Surely not. Either way, let me know in the comments below. I'm so happy to be back to YouTube and doing one of my favorite things, which is talking about just movies and TV shows that I've been watching. I recently finished the new season of The Bear as well, so I'm thinking to talk about that, but I feel again like I need to let it marinate. I think for a while there, I was really on a must get videos out as soon as the new movie or show has come out, but actually I like the idea of letting things just marinate for a while in my brain. I feel like I have a lot more to say that way than straight away out of the cinema. Anyway, that's all from me. I'll see you in the next one.